everybody. Welcome to the show. I hope that you can hear us okay. It is myself and BJ Swain. BJ, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I am very grateful to be able to have any conversations with you out in public, and hopefully people will be joining and chatting with us. I will keep an eye on our chats so that we can respond to it accordingly as people start to ask us questions. But this will be broadcast live and also going to be recorded and looked at later. All right, so we already have at least one person viewing. Awesome, great, cool, good to see a couple of people. All right. All right. So when we were talking about things that we want to talk about, I mean, there's always something that you and I can talk about. There's so much going on in our lives, and you're always working on a new project with your occult practices, and you're always blogging about new things. And there's always the witch blood conversation that we've been having off and on for a couple of years now, and um, the familiar end to me. I've loved the memes that you've been doing lately. By
Thank
the
you.
way, those are great. Um, yeah. So, but we were talking about what we wanted to talk about today, and you brought up the idea of what it is when you're first starting out, the path to starting out as a magician, and what it is to really begin as a magician, and what kind of ideas you can get at the beginning, and how that can impact your path as you go along. So, where would you like to start?
Well, I guess it makes sense to kind of start talking about getting started. And I realized, I think it was while I was working on Familiar Unto Me, that sometimes some of those questions about like, oh, well, when you're starting out, like, how should you do this, or what do you do to deal with like these thoughts or this sort of thing that comes up, and I think that was the first time that I kind of confronted the fact that some of how I grew up and was exposed to some of this is different from a lot of people. Because there's some things that people kind of question or aren't sure how to like process or deal with because they're coming to magic as adults, or they're coming from kind of a rather secular background. And I don't have that perspective of kind of being cut off from those things.
Well, when
Um,
did you start? When did you first get started with that, with your occult training and your practices as a magician? Then.
I was, I think, about like 11 or so when I got my first books on magic, but I had been talking with spirits and having spirits teach me to do magic things, and was experimenting with trying to figure out how magic worked from about the time I was 5 or 6. And so it was something where the idea that magic was in the world and was something you could experience and explore was something that was always part of my life. And there were like things that my parents kind of talked with me about and showed me that kind of connected with that and laid groundwork for that. So I didn't have that same disconnect from those things, or a lack of awareness that magic was there, or a lack of awareness that the spirit world was there. I guess what I had was a lack of awareness that books were there. It was I on another podcast, I told a story about how I read a book where the main character found a magic book and learned magic, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, there's books on this somewhere. I can go find books." And that was the big revelation for me. But it was still a revelation I had at a pretty young age, and so I think for a lot of people, one of the hurdles in coming into magic and exploring magic is accepting that magic is a thing that can be real, accepting that magic is out there, and sort of how to square what they think about the world and the I'm making air quotes as I say rational, what the sort of rational idea or the material idea of the world is with the idea that there can be magic. And
Right.
I think for those of us that grew up in a way where there was never that distinction, some of those
Mhm.
questions of like, well, what happens when like you feel weird like trying these rituals because you don't you aren't convinced the stuff's real yet, or you aren't sure the stuff's real yet. um, and I think that's an important thing that a lot of people go through, and it's a thing where it kind of depends on who you're talking about and like which teachers and which authors you're talking with who, as far as like whether or not we can answer those questions, because there's definitely some people out there where they are well-known magicians now who write books and teach classes, and they came to magic what I would think of as late in life. Like they got into it in like their 20s or maybe their 30s. And then you get other people where it's like they started experimenting with it in elementary or middle school or maybe high school. But then you also have people where they don't tend to talk about it as often openly or in public, and that's something I'm trying to help shift. But people where it's like they kind of grew up immersed in interactions with spirits and learning things from spirits from the time they were little kids, and that became part of what led them into magic and how they got there. And so I think there's different perspectives out there, and so there's going to be different answers to those questions of how do you deal with being a beginner and what it's like to start out and how you get started based on what the perspective that the person being asked the question has, like how they got started.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, for you, because you came from that background, yeah, it would be completely different. Um, I think since I came into it in my teens, right? So like I was 16 when I picked up modern magic, and I came into it after or about the same time as I was reading Illuminatus. So, and I'd just taken LSD, so my whole like brain had opened up, and my father had been all into sort of new ageism, or like the like we had a book on chakras, and we had a book on the Yellow Emperor's pillow book was amongst our library, and the Tao of health, sex, and longevity was on our bookshelf, and I read all that stuff growing up. So I was familiar with Taoism and the idea of enlightenment from a Western perspective on things. Thank you, Dan. Dan says, hi, it's great to see us both together. Blessings be upon us. Blessings be upon you too. Um, but yeah, I mean, I didn't get into magic until after I got into LSD and Robert and Wilson and the whole Illuminatus thing, where I understood that everything was one thing, and there was this whole idea of what the all thing was that was contrasted and compared to my Christian upbringing. So my charismatic, the Holy Spirit was real kind of thing. So it was like reinterpreting all my Christian stuff through this lens of occultism um, and whatnot. But the exposure that I got as a teenager to all of the occult community was, the '90s, with the whole self-help, and like Robert and Wilson presented all of the occult ideas with the circuits of consciousness, right? And as you're progressing through these circuits of consciousness and awareness, and you take control of yourself as a fully conscious and aware entity, you're going through this process of integrating your shadow side, and each of the stages of initiation, like in the OTO and in the AA traditions, represented an integration of different parts of your psyche and whatnot. That's kind of how Robert Anton Wilson presented the idea of the great work, and the idea of occultism and the path of magic was very much intertwined with the idea of self-help and self-transformation and all that stuff. And it took me years to start to shake that. And the Golden Dawn, I think, has that whole that conflation, I think is what you called it, of the great work with magical practice itself.
I think one thing that you said there, like to jump back a little bit, is the reviewing your Christian upbringing through that lens that was introduced to you as you were exploring this other stuff. And I think a lot of people talk about how we have sort of like a background Christian culture in America, and I would assume most of Europe has that. But a lot of times when people talk about those things that are the background Christian culture and the things that people don't assume are coming from that Christian background culture that they think of as just the standards of our modern culture, a lot of times people try to assert things onto that aren't really coming from Christianity, aren't necessarily Christian things. But it's still safe to say most people in, again, air quotes, Western culture have that kind of Christian backdrop. And but for most people coming at Christianity where they grew up in sort of a Protestant Christian background, unless it was like charismatics or something along those lines, where what I like, the stuff that I would like to call witchcraft Christianity, um, there's Christianity can often be kind of like a social club, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a thing where it's like you've got some rules, you've got a community you're part of, but it's not really in touch with mysteries or sacraments or spiritual things. And I think that feeds into some of the issue people run into where they start pursuing spirituality through magic or through occultism, and it becomes psychologized because
Mm-hmm.
they're used to spirituality and religion being something that is largely a social phenomenon, largely a structure for rules for your life, and not something for
Right.
engaging in an actual experience.
And
And that was,
yeah, but in Christianity, I was taught that our growth spiritually was more important to us than our psychological growth. But at the same time, all the spiritual growth self help books, the equivalent in the Christian community that I had been exposed to, early on, that their version of it was still all about using the Bible and your relationship with God to go through this psychological transformation to integrate your shadow self. Again, it's still the same basic concepts being regurgitated through the lens of whatever belief system it was.
yeah,
So that conflation is there in Christianity too. This idea that you're like the idea that the pastor does no wrong because they've stopped sinning, because they've been good. Hey, Agla, nice to see you. um, uh, Anybody who gets to a point of being a pastor is somehow going to be holy and ascended, or like beyond sin, and then they end up sinning. It's somehow like a shock to people. I forgot where I was going with that, but like, but yeah, there's not that transformation. Okay, at this point in the video, we had a little bit of technical difficulties. I am segueing back into where BJ is picking up where he had left off.
yeah. And so I was saying that people frequently get kind of in that mode of looking at magic and occultism all as like this monolith that's about uh, sort of secular self-help ideas, as opposed to actually like looking at the great work as a distinct thing, looking at mysticism as a distinct thing, looking at magic as a distinct thing, and how they each have their own purposes and things that are their goals. And those goals can kind of feed back to each other and support each other and help each other. But when we try to uh, look at them as if they're all the same, then it conflates it into a point where we lose a lot of the utility of each thing, and kind of come up with this other thing that people end up doing. And people, I think, kind of find ways to satisfy themselves with that, where it becomes about like, oh, this is my spirituality, this is how I be a good person, this is how I engage religious ideas, and they sort of let go of the idea of this is how I get money to get a new car, or this is how I have a vision of the throne of God, or this is how I create spiritual medicine for the world. Whereas those are sort of the purposes of those kinds of concepts and systems.
Right. Yeah, they lose sight of the great work in pursuit of whatever else we get told the great work is instead. So
And I think that kind of becomes an interesting question on the idea of becoming a magician or getting involved in occultism, because we all have ideas of what we're looking for or what we think it is when we start out, and then we read some books or we look at some websites, and it tells us, oh no, it's not these things that you've heard, it's this other thing. And I think depending on what sources we use, maybe we're getting told something good and useful, maybe we're getting told something not useful. But I think it's there are some people who they get kind of stuck and decide, okay, this thing that I've been told that magic is, that must be what it is, and I want to do magic, so I'm going to convince myself that I like this and this is what it should be. And then you got other people who they try to explore a wide enough array of stuff that they come to find like, oh, I don't have to interpret magic in that way. I can find something that's more like what it was that I originally wanted. I guess like if you go to the ice cream parlor and someone has told you that ice cream is vanilla, and so you either get stuck ordering vanilla all the time, which I would be happy with because that's what I like. But there's always the other 30 options that they have. And if you actually look in the case, you can find those other
Right.
options and find the ones that are suited to you.
I never really cared much for the ceremonial magician types who have opinions about the kind of the goetic magician types who are actually using magic to get ahead. The idea that somehow because you can use magic to ascend or have a vision of God, that that's the only right path and the only right way to use magic going forward from now on. So help me Jesus, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that do tend to think that way that don't have any reason to believe that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's part of why I tend to stress it being important to talk about those things in terminology of mysticism, so that it leaves room for people who are looking for more practical applied magic to use the terminology of magic to describe those things that most of society would understand as magic. And it's we we have separate sets of words for those things, but a lot of magical literature, and I think a lot of it's because when a lot of magical literature got going around the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, they didn't have a lot to work with, and they wanted to make things seem rational and reasonable. So making magic look like it's mostly about mysticism or making magic look like it's mostly about psychology was an easy way to do that. And
Right.
I think a lot of those magicians early on were probably doing actual real magic stuff. Like when you look at more of what the early Golden Dawn people were doing, they had some weird ideas about spirit work, but a lot of them were doing spirit work and a lot of them were doing magic to try to get stuff done. But a lot of the writing that came out of it was more like, this is how you become more than human. This is how you be the fullest thing that you were intended to be and how you come to understand the beloved and all. And that became what stuck. And then you've got generation two of that with Regardian and Fortune. And they're like, oh my gosh, this new psychology stuff is super cool. Like
Right.
that's what magic is.
Yeah, and they tried to replace what magic was actually doing with this psychological thing that was somehow more spiritually healthy or pure. It's the same thing that like Iamblichus was saying, or that Porphyry was saying about the Galatia all the way back in the day, right? I mean, this isn't new. This argument that practical magic is bad and spiritual magic is good. It's the ongoing debate for sure.
Yeah, and I think even within that idea that I think some people in recent years have tried to stress that uh, Neoplatonism is anti-real magic, but like there were Neoplatonic teachers and people who were the leaders of the academy who did real practical magic. Like there's lots of stories about that with Proclus, with him calling on spirits to appear in front of him, him making rains come, him doing things for the community with magic. Like Proclus ran the Platonic Academy, but he was also a sorcerer.
Right.
And but and I think a lot of people don't look back at why they got into magic in the first place because I doubt most people wandering around in their mall bookstore and picking up some scary looking book on magic are doing it because they want to integrate their shadow and become a better person and become closer to God. They're doing it because they want to do cool things with magic. I mean, I know for me, like when I got to the point of looking for books on magic, where I was like, okay, I want to seriously learn this and really know what it is and how to do it instead of just going outside and talking to spirits and trees and trying to figure out how I can talk with them to make things happen. Um, I, as like an 11, 12-year old, was like, man, if I could learn to like levitate and shoot lightning bolts, I'd probably get laid a lot because I'd be super cool. And I feel like that's what it is. Like
Right. You want to get laid.
people, yeah, like people are they have like their regular things that are the stuff that normal humans want,
Mm-hmm.
and magic seems like it would be a cool way to get that, whether it's that you can get it through magic or whether it's that magic will make you cool or make you have the things that allow you to get those things you want. I think most people come to it because they want that, and I think a
It's
lot of people don't.
Maslow's pyramid, right? I mean,
Yeah,
and it's just and magic is the great equalizer, right? That was something that I think Jake kind of was. Jake Kent was sort of a big deal pusher. Like he pushed that quite a bit. That magic was the way that the common person could get access to the liberal arts degrees, like through the Goetia. The Lemegeton's Goetia was the liberal arts college stuff that
yeah,
you could get, right?
yeah, and that's something that, oh, I can't remember the author's name now. She wrote the biography on Isabel Gowdy, but in her book on cunning folk, she talks about how spirits often tell people that they'll make them rich, that they will give them wealth and riches and all kinds of money. But when you look at the lives of these people who worked with them, the spirits never come through on that, but they do give them money. So, like a lot of your people who were cunning folk and people who got uh, accused and probably killed in witch trials, who seem to have been people who actually practiced magic, their magic did result in them getting money. It did lift them out of poverty frequently. And so that kind of great equalizer thing plays in there, where it was a road for the impoverished to get something that was closer to what the middle class at the time was.
Right.
Um, Even if the magic was just kind of making money trickle in, that was still a big deal in the early modern period where money was not trickling in otherwise.
Well, and besides the back when Goetia was being developed as a technology, it was still pretty common to just trade in eggs and chickens and whatever your farm is producing and whatever you manage to grow this year. It wasn't like money was that common
I,
at the
I
time that
feel like that would be a great like comic strip. Like a magician is complaining to the spirit that it's giving him money, but it's not making him wealthy, and the spirit's like, well, back in 800 BCE, this was the equivalent of being wealthy.
but are you hungry? Well, it's
Yeah,
like Ak is like you put his seal on something gold and you'll never run out of money again, right? Your bank account will never be empty again. But it'll hover around $35, for like 2 years. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not the wealth I want. And it's like, yeah, I know, but you're not broke, are you? You got $35. Thanks, I think.
going back to the idea about like desire and how you get started. Like for me, it's like I was early adolescence. I was a tween when like I started looking at magic books. So very, we could say the desire to be cool in order to get attention, in order to get the physical benefits that come with attention, is sort of a puerile desire, but it really is the basis of a lot of human endeavor, those kinds of desires. But so for you, when you got into uh, to magic, I guess you had the benefit of LSD and Robert Anton Wilson guiding your thinking. I was not so Gen X to experience those things. What was it you were looking for when you first like started getting into magic? What did you want out of it?
It was, well, again, it was the Great Equalizer for me, right? It was I read all these stories in the fantasy novels about the kid who discovered the secret power within that all of a sudden made them equal to the jocks and the cheerleaders and the cool kids at school, right? It was all these young person discovers magical power and really sticks it to them, just like the never ending story, right?
Yeah,
The whole fantasy thing of the kids in my age group was to discover magic and somehow be cool. as if as if we thought anybody was cool who was doing magic. Like it's not like there was any magical role models that showed anybody being cool. But it wasn't about being cool, it was about having the power to get what you wanted, without having to be all the cool things, right? Like you can't be as cool as the football player maybe, but you can, or you can't be as cool as the person whose father buys him the BMW, but you can get the money to get a BMW given to you. So sorry, I
Yeah,
think
and
that cat.
I think that kind of becomes the trap with a lot of what was popular magical literature back in the 90s, and I would presume the 80s and beforehand. And I guess a segment of magical literature today, probably still a lot of your beginner literature, a lot of your more mass market magical literature still is doing the same thing, where you get it and it starts telling you, like, oh, I know you bought this book because you wanted the power to get the things that the cool people have. You wanted the power to get the things that the wealthy people have. But that's not what's important in life. And that's not what magic's for. Magic is sacred. Magic is spiritual. Magic is about the gold that you receive from being a better person and
Right,
being
it's a spiritual gold. It's
yes.
not.
And
It's not the BMW, but
yes. And
But I want the BMW. I want that. I
yeah,
want the
like
wealth.
I don't want a chest of fairy gold that looks really pretty when I look at it, but you can't touch it and can't use it for anything.
Well,
Um,
that's the whole spiritual. That's the wealth promised by Christianity too, right? In the Christian world, you're not supposed to look for worldly wealth. You're supposed to look for spiritual wealth, right? And that's the whole big lie that the elite of the wealthy, the big scam of Christianity is, let's get all these sheep to give us their money, and not mention that the wealthy people have all of this money, right?
yeah,
And like let's trick them into thinking that their work is going to give them a spiritual reward after they die, and that's when they get their reward, is after they die. But in this lifetime they give us their money. That's like the big scam of every religion is, give us your money, and when you die, and then you'll get your, well, it's like trickle down economics, but like from a theocratic approach to it. but
yes,
but that's what they try to apply to the whole occult thing. Like, I have this magical power to get rich, why can't I use that? Because my if I was really using magic right, I would be using it to become a better person, because my rewards would be even greater than the actual wealth. Horseshit, right? I mean,
yeah.
give me the money and I will decide whether that makes me a better person or not. You know?
And I think the easy thing with that, or the reason why that's attractive, is because if someone's writing books or they're making money teaching classes, and people ask them, well, why are you writing these books? Why are you teaching these classes? Shouldn't you just be wealthy because you're a sorcerer? Like, or people are like, well, I'm using your rituals and your spells, but I'm not getting wealth. I'm not getting these things that I want in life. Why am I not getting them? The easy answer, the easy out for that is, oh, it's never been about that. It's about
Right.
reframing how you think so that you understand that you have wealth now, even though you're poor. And that's something, like, I mean, Crowley talks about that in um, the initiated perspective on magic, or whatever the essay that is with the Goetia, where he explains the demons being parts of the brain. He talks about that you do a spell for wealth and it changes your perspective, so you understand that you're wealthy, or you understand different ways to work with what you have so that you can feel wealthy or experience wealth. And that's utter nonsense.
Right.
Because if you're poor and you can't survive because you're poor, doing a ritual to make yourself feel better about being poor doesn't make you wealthy. You're still poor and you're still not surviving. And I've seen people out there now where they'll offer classes like $400 or $500 to learn magic from them, and that's their perspective on magic. That it's about changing your psychology and changing your perspective, so you understand that you don't need to use magic to draw love into your life. You need to love yourself and understand that there is love in your life. You don't need to use magic to get money. You need to use magic to change how you think about money and recognize that you already have money, or recognize how to use your resources better, or to
because
make yourself feel
right.
better about knocking on doors and putting in job applications.
Right, exactly.
And
And Agatha Dunlop, she just says that that sounds like the law of attraction, though? Question mark. And like, yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what it is. It is a law of attraction. It's safer to sell a class that says if it doesn't work, it's your fault, than it is to sell a class that says if the magic doesn't work, then I'm teaching it wrong. You
yeah,
know, and that's what it boils down to it's victim blaming. Like if I teach you that I'm going to conjure, if I sell you a Fascinus talisman and I tell you it's going to bring you the perfect sex in your life that you want from your sex life, and you get it and you're like, I've had it for a month, I haven't gotten laid yet, this is bullshit. You have a right to fucking get your money back, right? It's not doing what it says it's supposed to do, right? I don't offer
and
that guarantee anymore, by the way.
and
But
that's like with my book Luminarium. I had done the method that Luminarium teaches and had success with it. Um, there's a ritual in Living Spirits, which is basically a demon version of the ritual that's the basis for Luminarium. And when I did that in a public setting, multiple people came back to me and expressed getting really intense results that
mm-hmm.
were things that they couldn't explain as anything other than the demon that we conjured giving them what they asked for. And so it was something where I had experience with this working not just for me, but other people working with that. Not other people working with that method, other people getting results from me working that method for them. But that wasn't good enough for me. I wanted to make sure that other people could go out and do this and get something with it. And so I put together a team of people to test run the book before I published the book.
Right.
And I don't do that with every single thing I write. There are some other projects I have coming up where I plan to try to put together test groups to make sure what I'm putting out is something that's going to work. And I know Alison Tchaikovsky does that
Mm-hmm.
with her Pentacles. She will
I don't
not
do
just
that.
yeah, like any of the products that are being put out through Practical Occult, she
Yeah,
gives them to people to test and get results from them
a
before she
lot.
starts selling
A lot of
them.
people are doing that. But who else is it? That Edward guy that does the Ivory Tower stuff. He sent me some Agrippa talismans to test before he started selling them. And I think that is probably best practice. I don't particularly do that myself. I get inspired and I'm just like, this is going to work for everybody, and then I sell it. And sometimes it works, and sometimes
And
it doesn't work as well as I expected it to.
yeah,
But
and I'll have some things where like I'll include rituals in books where I'll describe it as you could do a ritual like this, and that's something
mhm.
where I'm like, I know how this works, and I'm putting together. This is how you
Right.
could put together a ritual. And so
Okay,
it's
so
something like
like
that.
you and Sarah Mastros are professional magicians, and when I say that, I don't mean just like you make money from doing magic. I mean like you know your shit when it comes to doing magic. You're witches, you know what to do. And when I was reading through her book on talismans, on the Key of Solomon talismans, one of the things that struck me about it was she understood how they were built well enough to restructure them or reconstruct them based on what they're supposed to be done, right? You also can your shit. And if you're going to put together a ritual, it's going to work because you know how spirits work. You know what the laws of nature are when it comes to the natural laws of spirits and conjuration, and what the method of conjuration should be and why it works, and what human beings are, and why a human can conjure a spirit. You have an understanding, a framework in your head that already explains all that stuff. You don't need to. So when you write a ritual, it's not going to be like some witch talk witch that like knows that herbs are related to magic. So I'm going to go through my mom's cabinet and say the herbs that I think smell good together are a spell. It's not the same thing. You know what I mean?
And I think the I think in terms of like that sense of professionalism and that sense of you are putting together something that works, we can see that in other cultures too, where uh, I forget who it is that pointed this out, but it was on. I think it was actually on an episode of Earn Soup. But someone once pointed out that if you look at cultures where people's lives are a little more tenuous and the professional working magicians in their community are who they have to rely on for life and death situations, then there's an expectation that their magic has to work and it has to do something. And
Right.
so people in those situations, they get results, and they get results with enough consistency that people are willing to go to them and willing to spend money, and they're able to work professionally. And
So are you saying that their desperation is what drives their success?
I'm saying that they aren't engaging in magic as an intellectual, spiritual, secular, humanist pastime.
Right.
And so their magic has to work. So they've got to find means and methods that are going to work relatively consistently for them.
So right.
Maybe it's
We
kind of the Victor
we
Anderson thing of there's always going to be witchcraft when there's like desperation. I can't remember the exact quote from him on that. And so maybe there is something where that desire and need does fuel the magic more.
right.
There could also be the element of like people in those cultures are in more inspirited cultures. And so there's closer connections there. But I think it's also the professionalism of stuff is more tested, stuff is more consistent, and you do things in ways that you know work as opposed to spitballing what feels good and what makes you feel like you're doing magic and what is a cool ritual for a ceremonial context with your group of club members that are all paying
Dues
$60 a month
current.
to
Yeah.
cover your space rentals. Um,
So we have a question. Qui-Gon Tea Time says, What do you think accounts for failures and near misses? It took him a while to get near, but near misses from individual to individual. Like, why is it like one person can do a ritual and they get results, and another person does the same ritual and doesn't?
I think for me, this is why I hate when people try to say that magic is science or try to equate magic to science. I think in the sense of science being knowledge, sure. Magic is a way of technology. It's a way of applying knowledge to do things in the world. But we can't measure all the different factors that are happening in magic, and we can't measure all the different factors that are happening in a situation. So there's always going to be things that we can't account for, things that we aren't
Okay.
expecting.
So is your like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle of why sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't?
Yeah, maybe the electron is on the other side of the cosmos.
Okay,
Uh,
so I got you. So I'm in the camp like little big man, the what was his name, the Native American and little big man when he's up on the mountain and he's trying to die and he's up there. I'm dead. I'm going up to the spirit world, and it fucking starts to rain and he's still alive. He's like, sometimes the magic works and sometimes it don't. That's that's where I'm at with it. It's just sometimes it works and sometimes it don't. I don't try to explain it. I don't understand why, because like you said, it could be anything. It could be infinite numbers of people. Jason Miller has that explanation for why your big magic fails, like why you don't win the lottery is because a million other people are doing the same magic you are, or like why if I curse Putin it's not going to work is because all these people actually support Putin too and their magic is countering your magic. I don't believe all that shit because sometimes I'll do a spell and it's amazing and it kicks everybody's ass no matter who stands against it. And other times I'll do a spell and it's a dud. And and I've looked at astrology and astrology says nothing should ever work. So it should always fail and you should always have a bad time no matter what. That's what astrology has taught me. So I don't trust that either, but I don't think we can know. I'm agnostic about it, and I think I'm sort of almost a militant agnostic that you can't really know if your magic's going to work until you do it and see. But if it doesn't work, I think you have to do it again. So
so here's an example that from a story that I like to tell in my own life. When I was 19, I wanted to travel across the country to go party with a bunch of magicians in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And I I grew up in kind of the lower end of upper middle class, and so I didn't work. I didn't have a job until I finished college, and I just had an allowance straight through. So I had money for things, but not necessarily money to be like, I'm gonna go travel across the country for a week. And so I decided I was going to use magic to get the money for this trip. And at the time, I had this idea that I would make a career out of buying scratch off tickets. And you're 19, you're weird. And like
I think
I
everybody has that idea. I think I tried it. I've
so
blessed my
I
scratch off tickets on a number of occasions.
so I worked with Mercury, and the goal was that I would buy scratch off tickets and get the money for this trip. So then I didn't go buy any scratch off tickets. And
That didn't
so
work,
that's
did
the thing
it?
everyone always talks about with magic is you've got to do the road work. You got to get out there and pound the pavement. And if you're doing magic for a job, you've got to go and apply for a job somewhere. If you're doing magic to meet someone for sex, you've got to take a shower and go to the club
Right.
and talk to
You got to
people.
do something different. You can't just like buy the fastest talisman and go to work and wait for everybody to go fall all over
No,
themselves trying to suck your dick. It's
those
not
those statements are useful, but they're not actually true.
right.
Um, you can do magic and have things come through. Like I did magic for a job, and I got a phone call from a former boss who went to another company telling me that she told the new company to hire me, and
Mm-hmm.
I got all the things that I wanted in that job and didn't apply for anything.
Right.
But in
Right.
this instance, I didn't go buy my scratch off tickets. I still got the money. Um, and so I was working with Mercury. So Mercury rules travel, Mercury rules gambling, which was the angle that I was going for. But Mercury also rules commerce and communication and theft. And my father was the lab manager for a telecommunications startup at the time, which like all those things that we take for granted, and actually like stuff like Zoom, where you had integrated networking systems for multiple parties in multiple locations to do meetings through telecommunication software. They were like one of the first companies launching something like that, and they had no idea what they were doing, and they failed. And so he kind of thought like, well, this was fun running this lab, but I guess I'm going to go back to my old job and I'm not getting anything out of this. So then he gets a call that the stock compensation that they included because it was a startup and they couldn't give as much compensation as they would have if they were more established was resulting in him getting thousands of dollars uh, because they were getting more from this stock from the company folding than they expected.
Nice.
And that's not how that works. Like you're
It's not
supposed to, like
supposed
if
to work that way.
companies like they were literally like all the equipment was being sold for like maybe not pennies on the dollar, but like dimes on the dollar. They were like liquidating. And so there shouldn't have really been anything for him to get out of that. But he got a bunch of money out of it. And my dad, I loved my dad. He was great, but he wasn't as much of that mindset of give your kids everything. My mom was very much of that, or is very much of that mindset. Um, but so he just comes up to me and is like, "Hey, I'm going to give you some money for whatever you want because I got this windfall, and so I'm just going to give you some money." And it ended up being enough money for me to take my trip and go meet the other magicians. And of course, Mercury also rules magic. So all the elements of how I got the money and how I used the money still were related to the magical forces that I was conjuring in order to get this money. It just wasn't the rulership that I had initially planned. So the magic still had an effect. It still did a thing. It just wasn't the thing that I expected because I didn't do other things that would allow it to manifest that way. And I think that's one of the things that we have to take into account too when we say that magic fails is did the magic do something? And if we analyze what happened, can we see how the results relate to what we did magically. And
Right.
so that can tell us something about the error that we have and
Yeah.
how to fix that error going forward.
So
It
do
won't
you
tell us everything because there'll
do,
be factors that we don't see, but sometimes there are pretty macro factors that we can see.
so
So I think you
do
have
you
what were you going to
think
say?
yeah, do you think every time are you in the camp where do you think that every time you do magic you have a result then? Like there's always a result when you do magic?
Not necessarily. Like I saw somebody make a comment the other day that there are people who are so anti-magical that they are like a dampener. That
Yeah.
around other magical stuff, they could use magical items, but
Super
something,
muggles.
yeah, about that person's uh, aura or nature is like a dampening field for magic. And I think for some people, maybe that could be a factor. That seems like a really reasonable thing. And I feel like I have seen people where that seems to kind of be what's going on with them. I think there's also things where it's like we can go through the motions and we can do stuff, but we're not engaging it correctly. And so it's like that thing where like people talk about intention being everything. And it's like, sure, intention is a great way to pave your path to hell. You can have all kinds of mistakes if you've got good intentions, but you don't do the right actions. Intention is important in magic because there's some things that are the opposite of those magical dampening people, where it's like there are some things that they just have magic and you can just apply them and they're magical. But most stuff is just normal stuff and it can be magical when it's applied in a magical context. And that's where like the intention comes in. Is you have to engage. You have to be the lab equipment that pulls all of it together and makes the alchemy happen by being the context for something magical to occur. And some days you're just not feeling it. Some days you're just not going to be jacked in the correct way. Some days you'll feel cut
Right.
off from your own magical nature, or you'll feel cut off from what you're working with. And you just can't turn the ignition on those days. And you might do all the
Speaking
stuff to get all right.
speaking as a priest, speaking as somebody who had to do the priest ritual, whether you felt like being the priest that day or not. Yes. I
Yeah.
mean, did you? How
Yes.
did you perform? How did you manage to raise your wand when you weren't in the mood?
I mean, the for the when I was a novice, one of the bishops had talked about how sometimes you're going to feel like you're doing a really crappy mass because you just don't feel engaged, you don't feel the magic, but that's because everyone else is experiencing it and you're just putting it all out there to them and it's not there for you at that moment. And so I always
Oh,
tried to keep that in mind when I was having a day that I wasn't feeling it for mass, that I was still
yeah.
going to try to give it my all because it could be there for other people.
They're
But
projecting onto you, regardless of whether you're projecting
yeah,
outwards yourself.
and I think that is like that's in that like sort of squiggy space where it's like
Yeah.
it's kind of the same as like the practical magic stuff, but also kind of a different thing. But like Sarah Mastros makes a good point that shame is like the opposite of magic. And if you feel a lot of shame, then that kind of turns off your magical faculties, and you've got to get out of that space where you're feeling that shame in order to really engage magic. And I think that's very true and something that had never occurred to me. And I was so glad when I saw Sarah make that comment because it was super meaningful for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think in those, it's like the same thing where people talk about like don't do magic when you're sick because you're not going to be able to engage it properly. Or where Jason talks about if you wait to the point where your life is falling apart and you're like desperate to try to fix things, you might have waited to a point that's too late because you're not going to be able to put yourself in the space to do the magic to fix the things you need. You've got to do it before you get to that space. Um, so I think there's different things that can occur in your mindset or in your experience where it just turns that switch off. And as I've talked about more and more in the last few years, there's different ways that people can engage magic. Like you can have magic that's working based on calling upon spirits and leveraging spirits to do things. You can have magic that's based on your own inner fire. You can have magic that's based on borrowed fire. Um, there's lots of different sources for magical potency, and you can the exterior sources you can actually be cut off from, and that can be temporary, or it can be that there's something that's actually blocking you from connecting to them. The inner sources, if depending on what inner source you're talking about, some of those are things that can go away, but some of those are things that are part of who and what you are, and if you're alive, you have it. But
Right.
even those things where they're part of you, you can feel cut off from it, and you can make yourself cut off from it to the point where you don't feel it, you don't experience it,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't engage it, and it
Right.
just won't work because of that.
Well,
Uh,
yeah. I have this the whole Zeus the head, Zeus the middle, Zeus the all in all thing I do, and there are moments where I'm at one with the cosmic unity, and there's other moments where I'm just saying the words, and it's like, and it's hard to be always on all the time, for sure.
yeah, and I think
Um,
that's kind of going back to the sort of um, meta theme of becoming a magician. It's really easy when you're starting out to have times where it's like you're kind of cut off from it, and you are doing things that are important to you and they don't work. And so you're just like, well, this is all bullshit. Magic's not real. And, or you're like, maybe they're right. Maybe it is all about psychology, or it is all about how you feel, or about being a better person. And it's not about getting a car or whatever.
right, but
Um,
what is it really about? Like, in your opinion, like, how do you really like I think like for me, I think there is a secret way to overcome that feeling all the time, and it is to pursue God with actually a little bit of heart, like put your heart into your love of God or whatever God you're working with in the moment, like actually put some love into it and some passion of your own into that pursuit of that God for that moment. And all of a sudden, I feel like the gods are immediately present there with me. And it's like the secret to ecstatic love, I think, or relationships with your gods is just to love them. But do you feel like that's something that you can always rely on, or is that something that I'm just like making that up in my head?
no, I think that's a really good answer. You've known me long enough to know that I don't like making statements that are absolute or guarantees or blanket
Right.
statements on anything. So, um, the unless I'm saying certain people or certain things are just wrong about stuff. I love saying people are wrong.
Well, I honestly, like I said earlier, I think that you and I should have a let's just bitch about everybody else in the occult sometime show, but we won't be doing that today.
No,
But
um,
yeah.
but
Oh, oh,
I think the suggestion you have there about feeling that love, feeling that connection, that can be a good way to pull yourself out from those things. I think uh, I would hesitate to say that it's something that can always be done or something that can be applied all the time, because I know personally there are times where I can't pull myself out of those feelings
yeah,
because because of my own emotional struggles that occur sometimes. And I wouldn't want to say that this is something that like you can apply those things all the time to get out of those situations, because I know there's going to be other people where they're also going to have moments where they're too deep in their own depths to do that. And if they feel like they should be able to always just turn to this spiritual thing and pull themselves out, that's going to be a really breaking experience to try to do that
yeah.
and not do it. So
Yeah,
I think there
you
are
got to have more
times,
than one method, right?
yeah,
I think like yeah, you're right, because like sometimes like I picture my fellow published authors in the occult community being much better at it than I am, and like just imagining them being better at it than I am somehow manages to push me to just make that connection a little bit better than I had previously. I
uh,
specifically think of one particular person. I'm like, well, if he can, because he's got this whole method that he's got to teach. I'm like, I can totally do that. I can totally do that. So, but yeah, I mean, there's like different moods the different moods that you're in need to be overcome with different methods. I think is what I'm trying to say. Let the punishment fit the crime and whatnot.
yeah. I think
We had a question earlier before it gets out of the comments. I wanted to bring it up before I forget. How do you balance between open requests versus very specific results requests when you're doing magic and you're asking for things for practical things? Um, like how do you balance between doing like God bless me with great work versus give me that job at Macy's as the best regional representative, whatever, or whatever, like how do you balance that out?
So I think before getting to that question, just one last thing on the failure comment. It's okay to
Oh,
fail. I think that's an important thing for people to understand is that as you get deeper into your magical practice and do more magic, you can kind of give yourself that litany of feeling better by being like, but I've seen so many amazing things. I've seen so many things that show me this works. I know it's real, even though I feel like it's not right now because this
oh,
failure hit me hard.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
for sure.
okay to fail and it's okay to feel that way. And that's part of becoming a magician is getting to the point where you know in your bones that this is there. And it's okay if
Success,
it's not there every now and again.
right?
Um,
Let success be your proof, because at that point, failure is only temporary, because
yeah,
you've had enough success to know that it's going to work sooner or later, if even if it doesn't work right now. That's why in
yeah,
my classes I always say, if it doesn't work, if you do the magic, you wait 2 weeks. If you don't see what you want, you do the magic again, and you
yeah.
ask it
Like,
to manifest in ways that show you why it failed. Like show you why you missed it before, because I think that matters. But
and like I'll do a thing with students sometimes in fencing where I'll show them the correct way to solve a situation, have them do it right a couple of times, and then I will stop it from working. So then I can show them like, okay, even though you did everything right, it's not always going to work. You're going to have times where it fails, and that's okay.
mhm.
But then, so what the new question though? Could you just summarize that again? I kind of
Oh, sorry. How do you balance open requests versus very specific results requests?
I mean, for me, I guess I like for open requests, I feel like that's more of something that I would put in a religious space. If I'm just like, I want blessings in my life and I want good things in my life, then I'm just going to ask my ancestors
Mm-hmm.
to bless me and give me good things in my life, or ask my gods to do that for me. And I'm going to trust them that they're going to look out for me and have my back and kind of keep things going. And that does involve those times where everything feels like it's falling apart and everything feels like shit, and you go to your ancestors or you go to your gods and you kind of cry to them or like beg them to do better for you, or you're just like, man, you
Right.
guys suck and I'm going to tear down your shrine because you're not being as helpful as I wish you were.
you
But
bring
that
you bring
happens
your
in relationships.
emotions. You bring your
Yes,
emotions to that spirit world again.
you're going to have days where relationships don't work out, whether we're talking about relationships with spirits or relationships with people, and then you work to get them back on track. And there's also going to be times where it seems like stuff is not going the way that you want it to, but there's other things happening behind the scenes, and stuff may end up better than it looks like it's going to be, or it may end up that it could have been way worse, and there will be details that you'll see later on where you see like, okay, I did have that help from my
Right.
spiritual allies there. Um, and that's not like trying to like make excuses of like you've got to convince yourself that they're helping out. I'm saying like no, like you can analyze situations and be like, whoa, this could have gone so much worse, but I can see where their hand was at play in that. Or, yeah, I can see these specific things that happened that play out along with how I asked for receiving help there. And I can see that the help was there, but it was a lot. And so there's still going to be things I have to struggle with. Like life's not going to be perfect. And I think that's one of the things with stuff that's like your sort of general globalized stuff is that yeah, you can have blessings, you can have good things happen in your life, but it's not going to make everything sunshine and roses all the time. It maybe takes the edge off, or maybe helps things get to that point where it's sunshine and roses. I think magic works a lot better for more specific things, and part of that may be my own bias of I have kind of a sense of use magic for stuff where you can look at it and say, okay, I can see where the magic
Right.
happened. Like
You want
it's
a falsifiable result. You want to know if you failed, or like, I
yeah,
want $1 million in my account, and yes or no,
yeah, it's
you've got
like
a million
I'm not
dollars.
gonna do a spell to make myself feel happy because the ritual itself could be a form of self hypnosis, and it could be a purely psychological effect that's happening there, based on me putting myself in a modality to think about being happier. But I might do a ritual to get things that I think will make me happy,
Right.
because then I can see whether or not the magic worked. And I kind of will often start to frame it as like, yeah, magic doesn't really work on that kind of internal psychology thing. You're just doing psychological stuff at that point. And that's not necessarily true. It can work on that stuff because you could do magic to impact the psychology of other people and it can work. So there's no reason you wouldn't be able to impact your own.
Right.
It's just, I always feel like it's not very testable.
Well,
And
everything can be magic if you look at it right, and if you stand on one leg and wink and blink and do a double think,
I mean, that's starting to sound like a ritual itself.
right,
But
exactly. Then you've got a whole magical ritual, and everything is magical when your friendship is magical when you.
But I guess to get more to a concrete answer, like a usable, workable, like applicable answer on that question, talismans and pentacles. Those can be very good for creating a general influence in your life around a certain thing. Um, so, like, there was one time I put a uh, pentacle under my phone case, and the app that I was using that related to what that pentacle does got a whole bunch more results after that. And
Is this
so it
your
wasn't something
is this
where,
your Candy Crush game?
uh, no, I just am really smart and so I can do patterns. I don't imagine that. Uh, I can play a game that is something we give toddlers to do. but Um, but I think when you have stuff that's like really general, having kind of globalized enchantment works well for general stuff. It's, I guess, to use sort of like Magic the Gathering terminology, that you have
Mhm.
like enchantments that work on a globalized basis versus enchantments that are dealing with a specific target. And
Right.
so I think pentacles, talismans, amulets, objects that do magic and kind of work in the background, creating like a field or presence or anchoring spirits to you that are going to kind of run interference on that general thing that it does. Those are great for your sort of general magic stuff. And when you think about it, those are things that are designed to just keep going. They're like a battery. Like
Right. They're
they
always
have
going
like
to
a,
manifest that particular result.
yeah. And so if you're doing like a spell or a ritual for something, that's usually something that's a little bit more targeted and a little bit more like, hey, I'm applying a specific pinpointed force to a
Right.
thing right now. And that's where you're trying to get something that's like relatively specific. So
Yeah.
if
So
you're
like
like,
for me in my planetary magic, when like I think like when you were saying that like you go to your gods for the general thing and a ritual for something more specific. Like I was thinking about how like for me I think it's like on a Tuesday I might ask for protection and reversal ritual, in general, but to actually materialize a specific job, I might include Mars, but it's not necessarily going to be on a Tuesday and a martial hour, right?
yeah, like that could be a way to think about it. Like for like a kind of mundane analogy, it's like an air purifier versus a shower. Like your air purifier is always on. It's generally cleaning whatever air passes over it, and it's making the environment for you better. But it's not going to keep you from getting dirty, and it's not going to like clean you if you are dirty. But a
Mm-hmm.
shower will do that. But the shower is also only hitting you at the time. It's not cleaning up the rest of the environment around you. So like things that have kind of a global effect are more like the air purifier. Things that are more targeted are more like the shower. And so
Right.
I think like if you were like saying you want prosperity in your life and you want more money flowing in your life, then you could make a pentacle for that and carry it in your wallet. If you're saying that you want a promotion at your job and you want a raise, then you conjure a spirit to do that, or do a sweetening jar on your boss, or put their name in your shoe, or however aggressive you want to get with it, whatever kind of technique is useful to you that you
The
like to
devil
apply.
one.
You do a specific spell or specific magic for that. and you can put the two together. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, like
And
I
be as
like
creative or as dull as you want to be.
yeah, like I like the idea of consecrating pentacles and then using them like batteries to amp up a more specific spell that kind of directs the energy that the pentacle would be sort of putting
Right.
out all over the place. It's like a laser pointer versus a flashlight. Like one, the light's really directed, one, the light's a little more diffuse.
Yeah. And yeah, and with time you get more complicated and more specific with things and over time, I guess. But okay, so I wanted to hop back. There's a couple more questions that have come in. Um, how often do particular spirits communicate with us a day? Is it constant for some and only when we meditate or focus, or for others? What about for the HGA? So they're asking, like, basically how often do particular spirits communicate with us? Like how much are we communicating with the spirits, I guess, and specifically about the HGA versus other spirits in general.
I mean, I think those are really individual questions. Like um, it's going to depend on the magician, and it's going to depend on the spirit, and it's going to depend on what's going on for both of
And
them.
yeah, and how much you want it to, how often do you want to talk to the spirits, right?
Yeah.
So this goes back to something that I was thinking about the other day about how the Holy Spirit is a gentleman is how it gets summarized, but like how, like, when somebody's being possessed by a spirit or obsessed by spirits, they don't really lose control until they want to, and when they want to have control again, they can take it back, like even if the Loa are writing a person in a hoodoo religion, or I'm sorry, a voodoo religion, it's not going to be it's not something where they do something that they couldn't stop themselves from doing if they really wanted to, you know what I mean?
I mean, I think it depends on how intense the possession is there, but yeah, there are definitely forms of possession where, I mean, possession's a gradient. Like it can be anything from the spirit is close to you and you can hear it really clearly, to the spirit's fully in control and you don't know what's going on and you don't remember it later.
Right.
Um,
And that's what you're saying about the whole, like, what about for the HGA versus communicating with other spirits, and how often do you hear it? Like you said, it's a gradient. It's
yeah,
just like possession. It's very much how
yeah,
much
and
you
I
want
think
to hear it. And
the knowledge and conversation relationship is 100% a form of possession, and so and I think that's like you should have a relationship with your HGA, uh, even if you don't have knowledge and conversation. If you're working with a magical system that includes connecting with your guardian angel, but if that's the case, if you don't have knowledge and conversation, then you're gonna hear your angel and interact with your angel when you seek out that contact or when you're doing things that create that contact. And when you're more immersed in doing those things, then the angel might come in and initiate contact and speak to you some. But then as you drop off from doing those, you're going to get less of that. But the idea with knowledge and conversation is you're creating a kind of a permanent link or sort of a permanent or semi-permanent possession state where the angel can interject whenever it feels that it needs to, and it's
interject to
not
what?
I don't know, to tell you that like you
Like what's it interjecting to? Like what are you linking it to? Like what part is it, like to your ruach, or is it to your nefesh? Like, is it like where is this link connecting to your spirit or whatever? How does that work?
um I don't know, like
What
I
do you mean you
guess
don't
like
know? You
I
gotta
don't
know.
I don't care that much about Kabbalistic psychology. I know it, like I learn it for different orders that I was in, but it's not the lens through which I view the world.
No, but you
Uh,
just no. I think it's interesting that
the
you said
I mean,
that
I
it
would
had a
say
link.
your neshama is essentially the portion of you that your angel is interacted with, but you interpret your neshama through your ruach because the ruach is essentially the interaction between the nefesh, the guf, and the neshama. So
Okay, right,
the
right,
ruach
right.
doesn't
So
exist unless you have a guf, a neshama, and a nefesh. And
right,
so
so it's like your soul is your intuition, and your HGA is speaking through your intuition and your soul, to
yeah,
your
but
mind, and your mind is
yes, you
interpreting it,
understand it through your mind,
and
and
yourself and your
sometimes
ego.
that can have like bodily influences in the understanding as well.
Right.
Um, but
Whew.
the easy way to say it is hear
That
it
was a
in
great
your
that was a great
head
little
that kind of
dive there.
connects to the back of your neck and talks to you through your head. Um, the so it's like that. It's a voice that's there and it's distinct from your own voice, and you know it and you recognize it. And so it's kind of like if you call up your angel to talk to it and interact with it, then it's like a person you know and you can reach out and make contact. If you're reaching out and making contact on a regular basis and there's more interaction and it's more familiar, it's like a coworker, a classmate that's kind of nearby and you can go to them for help and maybe they can kind of come over occasionally and offer their advice. And when you get knowledge and conversation, it's like it's your spouse and you're living with it and it's there and it
Mm,
can talk to you whenever it wants to and you can talk to it whenever you want to because you're occupying the same space most
right.
of the time. I would say all the time, but even with knowledge and conversation, that link can become more tenuous and become less used if you're kind of ignoring it or not engaging it. And sometimes you have to kind of re-strengthen that link occasionally.
Right.
But so I think the amount that you communicate with your angel is going to depend on what the nature of your relationship is, but also somewhat the stuff you're doing and also your own nature and where you are in your life. I think that'll be the same with other spirits too. If you have spirits that are like your familiar spirits where they kind of live with you and occupy a space that's shared with you, you might interact with those spirits a lot more. You might talk with them and hear from them a lot more, but that'll also sort of be dependent upon the relationship because some familiars might be spirits where
Right.
they're around and they're gonna interact when you want to interact, but they're kind of also doing their own thing and are not necessarily about interjecting into your life unless you're asking them to do stuff.
Right.
Um,
And then
the
there's talisman spirits that are sitting there doing an area effect like in general for you all the time. And then
Yeah,
later on you actually need them to do something specifically, so you invoke them as part of a different rite that's more specific also.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
and so there's a lot of it's going to depend on the spirit, a lot of it's going to depend on you, and a lot of it's going to depend on what you've got going on and what the relationship is.
Right.
So
It's
it'll
very
vary.
subjective, but at the same time, uh, all right. But at the same time, there are consistent results that you can expect. Like with the HGA, like one of the descriptions in the first century of your holy guardian angel or outside the supernatural assistant was when you call it by name, it appears before you and nobody else can see it, and that's something that is true. Like when it comes to communicating and that you were sort of describing, it's the same thing. Like when you want to talk to it, you call it and it shows up, and if it wants to talk to you, it can. But like you said, you got to reconnect. Okay, before we go too much further, somebody is asking you to recommend a very practical book that can get a novice started. They're at a place where they tried services and pinnacles enough to know that it works, but they're hoping to see if they can do this. And I was thinking Luminarium. Uh,
Well,
but
I thought that too, but I was going to say Seven Spheres.
Oh,
So
I
as to not.
appreciate that, but
I
no,
think that,
I think Seven Spheres is great for people who are interested in doing like the great work stuff. But
yeah, I was gonna say I think that's kind of the Luminarium's definitely very practical oriented, whereas Seven Spheres is very much build
yeah,
relationships and initiate
empowerment,
yourself through.
increase your efficiency as a magician and empower yourself in your practice is sort of what I think the Seven Spheres is about. And I think it does result in some great work stuff that is going to have a psychological impact on your life, but that's not exactly the point of it. It's
Yeah,
just sort of a side effect.
I think there's an element of Seven Spheres that you don't talk about a lot, but is very much there. That if people approach it slowly, where they are working the same sphere for several weeks or several months at a time until they start to see signs of the next sphere in sequence, then it does become a like it's not an initiation in the sense of it makes the initial contact for you. It's initiation in the sense of it is fundamentally changing and developing you and building that sphere into your being. And
I kind of just assume that if people start doing planetary magic, they're going to find out all this stuff on their own. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
I think a
I
lot of
think it
people miss
starts.
that element of it. So I think the book gets kind of overlooked because
Mm,
it's a great way to introduce yourself to spirits and to that kind of spirit work. And it sets up the relational element really well. But I think people kind of think of it as a very intro beginner book from because they look at it just for that. But like personally, I had someone I was very close with who worked seven spheres and took the approach I described, and it is very different if you actually really drill down into it that way, where you
hmm
make it a path of initiation and an actual working system that you're working with.
Well,
And I think that's
it came out of like the Seven Spheres itself. Like the whole book idea came out of our conversations about the Hermetic Kabbalah or Merkaba, right? Like Hermetic Merkaba was sort of like the whole foundational thing for that. But anyway, but getting back to the basic introduction to spirit work, like just the basic system of conjure, like how to conjure a spirit, how to do the magic, and ask it to do some work for you to make you rich, to get you laid, and to do the basic changes in your material experiences of the real world that magic is supposed to provide you with. Like what basic book would you recommend? I think Luminarium is effective for that.
yeah, and I think that was kind of so. Luminarium was I was trying to put together something so that people who wanted to use their pandemic free time to try
Right.
magic would have something where they could get started and do serious grimoire style magic without having to like go collect a bunch of things or work with a bunch of people or get a bunch of other experience. So the
Mhm.
idea behind Luminarium is that if you've never done any magic before, you could pick this book up, read it in the course of a couple hours or like a day or so, and then within the next 3 days, you could do the prep stuff, gather all the materials, and conjure a spirit and have something
Great.
happen.
I thought it was
Uh,
great because you could hit the ground running and actually and it'd be conjuring spirits within a week.
yeah,
For me, I like to recommend the art of drawing spirits into crystals from Trithemius, but just like because I did it, I found it like the day I found it that night, I was able to conjure spirits, and that was just on esotericarchives.com, and Joe Peterson provided that from the, whatever 15th century or 16th century, wherever it's from. But it's not new or anything. But like, as far as what people need to get started on this, I mean, what you need is a method of conjuring the spirits, a relationship, a belief system in place that gives you, in my opinion, you have to have a belief system that gives you authority to call the spirits. You have to have a reason to expect them to show up as a magician. You have to have some kind of thing that makes it work, and then you just have to do it. And when you start doing it, and you start to see the results, you refine your practice. But I think yeah, the key parts of that, I think Luminarium is probably the most balanced and easy approach to doing real practical magic that I think between
thank
anybody
you.
that yeah. So
I would also toss out since the question mentioned that they'd purchased some pentacles and they want to be able to do them themselves. Sarah Mastros' Sorcery of Solomon. Um, I will admit I haven't finished it. I think I've read about half of it, but I also attended Sarah's uh, Pentacle class at Convocation,
mm,
where it goes over some of the stuff from Sorcery of Solomon, and people make a pentacle in the class. Excuse me.
yeah, she's got
It's
an online class that's incredible too. It's really in
Sarah's
depth.
method and approach. It's kind of an idiosyncratic one. It's one that I think Sarah's kind of come up with that is Sarah's own working system, but it's got really cool and useful and innovative ideas in it that I think are worth exploring. And so even for people who have experience making pentacles and experience with working with different types of talismans, there's some insights into how you can bring uh, kind of the spirit work practice and sort of almost a necromantic practice with Solomon into that, and working dream practices in with that as well, that Sarah presents in the book. And so that's another one to check out if people
Mm.
are interested in pentacles specifically.
Great. Yeah. Getting back to the HGA, somebody asked, is the natal genius the same as the HGA, or specifically, do both share common abilities?
I think they're the same. I've never seen any evidence to suggest that they're different. There's tons of references in magic books to the good angel or the guardian angel. And when you look at the description in Abramelin, everything Abramelin says that the angel does is the same stuff that Catholicism teaches the guardian angel does. It's just
Mhm.
kind of the magic part is amped up in Abramelin.
Right.
But the angel's a teacher in Abramelin, the angel's a teacher in Catholicism, the angel's a teacher in every Cunning Man book that references the good angel. It's the same thing. And I've never seen a basis for the argument that they are different that made sense. Like some people uh, give the idea that the angel is super celestial, but super celestial angels can't leave God's throne room.
Well,
So,
yeah. I mean,
like, even if it were a super celestial angel, you would have to complete the Merkabah work, be in front of the throne of God, and then you could interact with it. So I think there is actually like a point in either the French Abramelin or maybe in the general Abramelin where it does say something that kind of indicates super celestialness for it, but it's a mistake. The author of the book said something that wasn't correct, and I think that has been used to try to create a separation between the Holy Guardian Angel and uh, the Guardian Angel, but clearly Abraham didn't read Pseudo Dionysius's celestial hierarchy, or he would have known that that's not what super celestial means. Um, I think there's also an element of it that it's kind of going with the idea that um, the angel is not specifically astrological, because there were periods in Jewish magic and Jewish mysticism where there was a belief that astrology just wasn't a thing. There were other periods where it was believed that astrology applied to regular people and it applied to the nation of Israel, but it didn't apply to Jewish people because of the covenant. Yuval Harari talks about that in his Jewish Magic Before the Kabbalah. If anyone is like interested in looking at the path of those ideas, so I think that may be part of why there's a couple elements that shift away from astrology in magic in general in Abramelin. I don't think that that is a solid basis for the idea that the angel is separate from your natal angel. If you look at Iamblichus's On the Mysteries, Iamblichus describes your guardian spirit and describes it as a spirit that sort of simultaneously comes into being and pre-exists you, but it is the collection of forces at the moment of your birth or the moment of your conception, the moment where you come into existence, however you're interpreting that.
yeah. There's a bunch of different ideas that were contemporary to Plotinus and Iamblichus and Porphyry, and they all had their different ideas of what it was. So I mean, it depends on what part of Egypt you were looking at the ideas in. So I think a lot of our ideas that one is different from the other uh, have to do with just sort of misunderstanding how it used to be cool to have different interpretations. The idea that when in Rome you do what the Romans do. It's not just that you worship the gods that are local to you. When you're local, it's literally the god of the city is the god of the city, and you worship the god of the city the way it's worshipped locally, because it's a different god. It's not the Zeus of the Acropolis, and you know what I mean. It's different enough that you do what they do in Rome when. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm off on a tangent again.
I think there are other tutelary spirits and guiding spirits that are either definitely different or probably different
Mm-hmm.
than the Holy Guardian Angel, but I don't think that Abramellin's method is the only method for connecting with your guardian angel, and I don't think
Not
that
either.
it is a separate spirit from all other guardian angel spirits.
Yeah, I have my own opinions. I've got a whole class where I go into why I'm right and else is wrong, and I'm charging a ridiculously low amount because of it. I want to make everybody understand that. But let's see. Somebody asked what a good starting point for goetic would be. Goetic spirits for an intermediate practitioner. I would like to recommend my own Goetic book on that because it's basically Trithemius for Goetia. It's a simple, easy method to do with your table of practice and tools you already have if you were doing seven spheres. So there's that. But do you have any recommendations for Goetic spirits for an intermediate practitioner?
Yeah, for some reason, when you were reading the question, I was interpreting it as like, at what point in your progress would you start that? But and I would say like
Oh,
whenever you feel ready.
I guess
Um,
yeah. Whenever you feel ready, I
the
would agree with about
yeah
that 100%.
and I know that's something where uh, you know that my opinion on that has changed because like when we first met, I was very much of the AA mindset of no, you do all your grade work and then you get knowledge and conversation and then you explore conjuring and binding the demons. And now I'm kind of
Right,
like talk to your angel on like day one and go out in the woods and find some spirits and sure conjure a demon if you feel like it.
right. Because
I
that's what you
think
used
like
to do.
yeah
That's the way. That was the actual path of magic before.
yeah I think building up some other spirit relationships first to build the skills for spirit relationships and having allies in the spirit world and being able to navigate interactions with infernal spirits first is still useful, but
It's common sense, right? I mean, of
yeah.
course, you want to work with friends before you engage with dangerous people.
Yeah, and as far as books to get started, Modern Goetic Grimoire is good. Um, I guess because I kind of just worked with the grimoires themselves on that because
Yeah.
there were other books at the time. That's what I tend to look at for that. Um, the Heptameron and working with the aerial spirits, which are kind of some people would say the aerial spirits and the Heptameron and the infernal spirits are the same. Some would say that they're in between. Most of the actual historic magic books say that they're in between. Um, but it's like that can be kind of a good point for working into that direction of the infernal spirits, and it uses a lot of the same materials and techniques that you would use.
Yeah.
I think as far as like the Lemegeton itself, um, some of the stuff in Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, which uh, the Megaton is partially based on, is a little easier to follow than what's in the Goethe Solomon. So I would say like check out Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, but that book is also huge. So you could also just go on Esoteric Archives and scroll through where Peterson has the magic components of it broken down and look at the titles
Yeah.
of rituals that look interesting to you and explore
Peterson's
those.
site is awesome for all of this stuff. It's great for practitioners trying to get their starts, trying to understand what the pieces are and how the pieces relate to one another. It's super useful. One of the things you were saying about the aerial spirits being sort of arguably the same thing as infernal spirits. Jake Stratton Kent also made that argument several times that basically all the spirits of Goetia, air quotes, Goetia, were also all aerial spirits as well. You know that they're that whole thing about the third Goetia being of a mixed nature, partially of air and partially of the terrestrial world. You know, the whole thing is sort of a useful fiction, but a fiction nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean the Liber Juratus says the same thing, and it gets more clear on it uh, than the Theria Goetia does, because it also sets up that you have the terrestrial spirits and the infernal spirits, and then talks about working with the different types of spirits. I believe the Heptameron also separates them. So it's a separation that's pretty consistently there in the books and in the worldview of the late medieval and early modern period. But the to go with the idea that the infernal spirits are also aerial If you look in the Book of the Offices of Spirits, it talks about Satan as a prince of the air. It talks about him moving through the air. But it also talks about Lucifer being chained so deeply that you can't actually conjure him, and so you can only conjure his minister, Tantavalarian. The apocryphal texts that become the basis for these ideas in Judaism specifically talk about the spirits being bound within the earth. And so if you look in the Book of Jubilees, when it talks about the destruction of the Nephilim, the the Nephilim spirits actually do travel in the air until Noah begs for God to give relief from them, and then Mastema is given a collection of them that he's able to keep to torment humans, but the rest of them are bound within the earth, which is the same place that the Watchers who fathered them are bound within the earth.
Yeah.
Although the second Enoch has the Watchers punished by being divided into two different levels of heaven. Those like the leaders of them are chained in a dark and despairing hellscape within one of the heavens, and then there's another heaven where the other ones that followed them are chained. The Livre des Esprits talks about them being cast within the earth. So it really depends on which sources you're looking at. Summa Sacra Magica is probably the best argument for the idea that the aerial spirits and the infernal spirits are the same, because the kings of the aerial spirits are listed under the rulership of Satan, under the seat of Apologia in hell.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Does it matter?
I think so. Like,
what does it matter though? I mean, all right,
well,
because like, how much is the, I kind of feel like this is angels and heads of pins and how many, you know what I mean? You know what I
I was
mean?
actually thinking about this a little bit as I was having lunch earlier today. How there's a very vested interest people have in making demons nice and making them not demons,
Oh,
and
that's true,
it's
right?
like,
I
why?
mean,
We could just have demons. Demons are cool. The world should have demons,
well,
and
okay,
every culture is.
because they don't understand. All right, so people can't accept that there is evil and that there are bad things in life. Like bad
Yeah,
things happen to good people, and everybody has a fucking problem with that, you know. And I'm sorry, but that's the problem. That's why we
I,
can't have demons be
I
just
think
demons.
there's a value judgment that people try to assert onto that doesn't need to be there. That it's like, ooh, angels are good, so that's better, and demons are bad, so that's worse. It's like,
Right.
no, they're just different things. They can be different things that do different things and have different natures. And that doesn't mean that like one is what you have to turn to and the other is what you should turn away from. And I think that's kind of like living spirit. That was like a big part of like my argument there, is that if you build an ecology of spirits, then you can look at the places that those spirits are attached to, how they fit into a structure, and what they do is all
Right.
things that feed into understanding them further, and then feed into understanding those components further. And
Okay,
so,
but my question is, does it matter if like having the extra detailed, extra rich, extra complex um, hierarchy of spirits, like and classification of spirits and such, that these are of third Goetia versus these are of the terrestrial nature versus these are of the aerial nature. Does it help in your daily practice? Is it something that you refer to on the fly, like in your week to week, month to month? Today, I'm going to be working with these things. Does it
yeah,
actually impact you, or is it just something that's nice to know?
the infernal realm puts you closer to a state of entropy. And so uh, the demons are hotter and more entropic and more chaotic than the aerial spirits, whereas the aerial spirits are closer to human experience and human nature because they exist within the terrestrial realm instead of beneath the terrestrial realm.
I see.
Uh,
So if you understand that one, so if you're working with, so just so that you understand what your result is going to look like, it's better to understand what this why. That's why you want this minutia of
yeah, and
understanding.
it's like it's the same
I
thing as like
gotcha.
so. no one has a problem saying angels are celestial and recognizing that because angels are celestial, they can be assholes who don't. And I love angels, sure, angels are great, but like angels don't get what it's like to be human, and they're
Right.
just like, bro, God's cool, love God. I'm gonna give you what you want, but I'm gonna do it in a way that makes you better, so you can love God more, because that's more important than what you're asking for. Whereas aerial spirits are like, yeah, I'm not human, but I can see what you guys go through and what happens in the world because I'm in the world with you, just sort of adjacent to you. So I can kind of understand what you're asking for, and I can kind of give
Oh,
it to you in a way that's sort of neutral. And
I
demons are like,
understand.
I
Okay,
am the inner darkness from before creation, and I will bring that back into existence by giving you what you want and adding chaos to your life.
I
Which isn't
I
evil.
honestly
That does not
don't.
make them evil. Like it's just they're creepy. But
I don't think they're like that though. I don't think it's
it,
like that.
have you talked to Astaroth or Asmodeus?
Yeah, and I haven't had the experiences you and other people have had.
I don't know. To me, they are like the primal forces from before creation,
I
and it
agree.
feels
I
like
agree
talking to them.
100%, but they're not evil.
No, I didn't. I said they're not evil. I said they're not. That
All
they're
right.
just a little creepier
Okay.
because they're like it's not even like antediluvian at that point. It's like before stars existed,
Yeah,
and
but so are
so
we,
like
right?
they're
So,
like pre-cosmic. So like it's just a very different vibe in my experience than talking to an aerial spirit.
all right,
Spirit, aerial
so
spirits are
my thing is like if I'm going to talk to the Allotory, my go-to aerial spirits are the Allotory. And if I'm going to talk to the Allotory, I'm going to call on them and I'm going to expect them to know things and be whispery and hear them communicate in the rustling of the leaves and whatnot. And if I'm going to call on like Bune to Bune whatever to get me wealth or whatever, I'm going to look for opportunities to manifest, and I'm going to feel like a pressure in the back of my head telling me to do things right. So I know how things are going to be different, but I don't. I personally believe that the idea that one is infernal and one is and angels are celestial and aerial spirits are somehow like better or going to care more about human beings or somehow are safer to work with than other spirits. That part I don't like, and I feel like your experience of the demons are going to be a direct mirror of your expectation of your experience with the demons. Like if you go in there cowering like a coward and you think these demons are there to kick your ass and eat you when you're not looking, you're going to have an experience where they do that to you. But if you go into it thinking they're your best buds and they're like your cosmic creation, co-workers who are there to do a job, and they might be more like construction workers than boardroom members, but they're still there to do a job, and they're not there to be your enemy. If you approach them as co-workers, you have more of a coworker experience than if you approach them as enemies that you
I,
have to
I don't
subdue.
I don't disagree with that, and I, I'm not saying because remember like so again I want to be really clear that I am not of the mindset of one is evil and one is good. I'm
Right.
of the mindset that they both simply exist and serve different purposes that are necessary within creation.
Yeah.
But if I talk to an angel, the angels feel, and it's going to depend a little bit on like which angel, because the angels also kind of have their own different levels of creation that they exist within. But they tend to feel like kind of big cosmic forces, but a little bit stale and dry. Like
Uh-huh.
you're talking to like a cosmic force that's kind of like a soldier and is very like focused on one particular thing. If I talk to an aerial spirit, it kind of feels like talking to a person, like, but that they are kind of like, yeah, I can do the thing that you're asking me for. That's fine, and they don't have anything else really going on. They're in the interaction. They're just sort of like, sure, I can do this. Um,
Mm.
the demons, and I guess like also like I don't do a lot with like your random demons. Most of the demons that I've worked with are kind of like the big ones, and I do tend to think that there are different types of demons amongst like the infernal spirits, there are some that are like the living forms of the pre-creation darkness, and those are like the kings of hell, that are from like the outer depths before existence happened. And then there's others that are like byproducts of nature and byproducts of creation, and like the demons in the Testament of Solomon. The Testament of Solomon's a great text for breaking that down. And by that, I always feel like I have to specify this, not Recension C that was published by Hadian, which is a super useful text. That's great. But it's like that text is various versions of demon descriptions from different Hygromantia texts assembled into a theoretical text that may have existed at one point. Whereas recensions A and B are actual like texts that survive from a point, and they have different demons in them, and what they describe is different, and the story that's presented to them is different.
Right, and I think as a magician, it's your job to pick the spirit and the pantheon and the lore that is closest to what the results are that you want to experience,
Yeah,
right? And
but
then you
the like
follow the rules that go with the system that you get your spirits from. So,
the demons in the early Testament of Solomon, those are kind of like the wild spirits of nature, and like some of them are spirits where they're like, yeah, I was a person who did some stuff and these things happened, and now I am a flaming horse's head. Or they're like, I am the force of wrath that
we
exists in the
we
universe.
we
Or
are we are way far off topic, and we have a bunch more questions coming in.
okay, I'll try to rein it in more then.
And we're also
Um,
we're also over time by like half an hour already. So I don't
yeah,
know how to actually try to rein, like, I don't want to rein in you. I'm having a great time having a conversation with you, and I don't want to rein in the audience either, for sure. Um,
I
let me
guess
see if I can
the short
summarize.
bit that I will
Oh,
say on it is the demons that I would think of as like those demons that come from the beginning of before creation. Uh,
mm,
those, when you talk to them, they feel like extreme depth, and it's like the opposite feelings of the angels. The angels feel like almost like extreme substance, like the purity of substance, whereas the demons feel like ultimate depth and a deep structure that goes back further than you can see or perceive. And
yeah,
there's
I
something
think I know what you mean.
like sort of pre-cosmic about their nature. And
Yeah,
so I think there
and
is actually a
connected.
fundamental difference.
Like the
And I
demons
think
almost
that
have like
that
a network underground that feels like they're connected to all the time.
yeah. And
Yeah,
so like that, when I talk about them being entropic or being connected to chaos, that's what I'm talking about, is that they are of the nature of the pre-creation void, and that it's experiencing that. And so like I guess it's much more of a Greek sense of discussing that than a Christian sense. It's not like these things are the encapsulation of evil, it's they're the encapsulation of pre-order.
great. Yeah, I still think there's yeah, I think your human experience of these forces is going to be still going to be very much colored by your expectation. So that's all I'm
I could
saying.
see that, except also like when I initially like experienced them, I was kind of going in from a thelemic perspective of like, oh yeah, these are. I didn't like go in with like their parts of the brain or parts of the
Oh no, no,
psychology, but it was like definitely a much more neutral perspective on them, and it wasn't like a ooh, these are scary oogie boogie creatures, but there was like a whoa, this feels really different from conjuring an angel, uh, kind of thing.
So my first conjuration was Gabriel, and he showed up, and I was just like, oh, that's it, and I was just like, I was surprised at how simple it was and how direct it was. And then after that, I think I went on to Bune, and Bune was just sort of like a little bit wild and a little bit sort of like more like the woods and the streams and the mountains. Like, I know what you're talking about with the archaic sort of primordial, but
Yeah, and I think like when we look at the spirit lists, there's a bunch of different types of spirits that are listed there, and all are called demons. I
mm-hmm,
don't think they're all the same type of spirit, but I don't think that there's a good way of going back and tracking through and trying to document historically what they
right.
all act.
But I think as a magician, I'm going to work with the spirits that I feel most are most attuned with what it is I really want to experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So Let's see. Let's see here. Do you want to have a final word on that?
On the demon, angel, aerial spirit thing.
Yeah.
No, I mean I agree with you. It's like you work with what makes sense for you, but also work with what makes sense for your situation. Because I think a lot of them can do the same stuff, but the way they'll do it and the completeness of it can vary some depending on the spirit, the type of spirit, and also the means by which you call them.
Right.
Like the different means, it's like those means are part of how they jack into the world to do things, and so different
Yeah.
methods will have different results.
See, I'm a very practical person. I want to, and I want to do it myself. I don't like to trust other people to do anything for me, and so I just want to, and I don't want any of their drama to get in the way of me accomplishing why I came to them in the first place, right? So, like, if I go to a haircut to get a haircut, I want my haircutter to cut my hair, and I want to leave. I don't want my haircut to be interrupted with her having a fight with another haircutter. I don't want her to get a call from her boyfriend saying they're going to come and kick her ass. I don't want any drama during my haircut, right? So, like, when I work with spirits, I go to the planetary forces and I'm like, okay, I want to have this happen. So I would need some Saturn and some Mars. And I'm like very controlling, I guess, and like co-worker about it. And let's make this happen. Um, but I think people who are very into like the Stephanie Connolly risers of the world are into the personal experience of the demonic from a very left-hand path, whatever. And then there's people like the Brian the Frater Ashton Hashens of the world who want to follow the grimoire traditions to the letter of the law. And then there's people who have the ceremonial magic training of all this stuff, right? Um, so, like, how do you have? But what's your like how do you think there's a better way to do any of this as opposed to any other ones?
Um, get witch blood, become quasi spirit, and then interact with the spirit world like you're part of it.
Right.
I think I think again, it depends on what your needs are, what you're going to do, what your own like mentality and competence is. Different methods will speak to you, and then you need to figure out what spirits are going to work best with those methods. Um, so yeah, for some people, having a very hands-on, interactive relationship with the spirit world is going to be the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who that's not the best way to go, you can still have relationships with spirits where you work with the same spirits. You have like a guest host type of thing where you give them stuff, they give you stuff, and you can do that from a very traditional grimoire type approach. You can do that from a contemporary witchcraft approach. You can do that in kind of a quasi-religious approach. There's lots of ways you can do it, but a lot of it's going to depend on what your needs are and who you are.
Right.
I think the
It's
one
going to
thing
be an
to
expression of your own creative process.
yeah, and I think the an element to consider with that though is that there are methods that are going to have different features in to keep levels of control, to keep levels of safety, and that doesn't mean you have to do the grimoire method perfectly exactly as it says in order to have that. But it just means whatever method you are approaching, you should understand how that method does those things, like how that method gives you some level of leverage, how that method gives you some level of control, what that method gives you to keep the actions as safe as they're capable of being, because you're never going to have 100% safety in anything.
Right.
But you just need to understand what the parts of your approach are and what they do, or look at the approaches that you're not going to use and understand the parts and what they do, and see what the equivalent parts are in the approach that you want to use and make sure it has what it needs to have.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. All right, man. I'm gonna go ahead and call it for the evening. I always love talking to you. We can carry on any old time you want to, um,
Okay.
whenever you want to pick things up again. But it has already been 2 hours, and I'm snacking on some honey roasted nuts here. But I got to get some food for Mill.
Okay.
All right, man. Well, thanks again for spending some time with us and coming on and chatting. I definitely want to keep this going because I think the great work is something that we don't talk enough about. And like you said, we need to talk more about what our expectations I don't know if ought to be is maybe the right word for it, but maybe definitely like after having done this for a while, where we ended up with wishing our expectations had been earlier along the way for sure. So,
Yeah. I guess like I hope there's nobody who like saw the path to a magician thing and was like, "Ooh, this is gonna be my roadmap to being a magician," and that like they recognized it was gonna be what the conversation was of kind of talking about what expectations are, how you get into it, and then what the reality is once you're there. I think we
yeah.
unfolded a lot of
It turns out we
experience
end up
based
having a
on
much more granular experience of him
yeah.
than you might prefer. All right. Anyway, all right. Thanks again, man. Appreciate
All
you.
right, thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.